Bill Macaitis, it's great to see you. Thank you for joining us on What's Your Process? I'm not going to do the whole LinkedIn background thing. People can do that on their own time. What I really want to know is, what do people need to know about you, Bill?
Yeah, 30 years pure play online, half on B2C, half on B2B, most recently with Salesforce, Zendesk, Slack. And now I serve as a board advisor for aspiring young AI and tech companies. I also have a SaaS CMOpro.com website where I do tons of videos about all the topics we're going to talk about today.
That's amazing. What a run it's been, and that list of companies is outrageous. I'm super excited to have you on the show. So let's get into it, right? Like, what is one thing that you are world-class at?
I just have a ton of experience with PLG. So I thought today would be fun to talk about PLG unlocking enterprise sales.
Amazing. All right. And do you have a process for unlocking enterprise with PLG?
I think, there's a lot of different elements of it. I think, first off, a lot of people don't even think like, hey, PLG and enterprise belong together in the same sentence. They're like, hey, these are mutually exclusive things. And I've just kind of seen over the course of my career that PLG is actually a huge unlock if you're moving into the enterprise. And there's a lot of different elements of it, everything from the pricing and packaging of it to the seed and grow to just making enterprise salespeople's lives easier. And that seems a lot of counterintuitive because I do think there's a lot of myths around product-like growth and enterprise, and do they work together, do they not? But in my experience, it's been something that's just hugely beneficial.
So where do you start?
I think for me, it's just number one, accept that, hey, this can work. So I think for like a lot of AI companies that are thinking about like, hey, AI SaaS, do we embrace PLG or not? Or maybe you're like, hey, we're just going to sell into the enterprise, right? And that's all we're selling into. The backdrop from PLG is one, just kind of recognizing that, hey, it can work for that segment. And the other thing too is like, it can work very capital efficiently for that segment. So, for a lot of, VCs out there, or even if you're in SaaS, like there's so much more focus now on the capital efficiency of your growth. And if you think about it, the old way of selling into the enterprise was, hey, we're going to hire a ton of outbound people. We're going to use a lot of account executives. We're going to run big events, send out press releases, buy off analysts, whatever we could to make this a better, enterprise type sale. And while those tactics all do work, they have one thing in common. They're very expensive. It's expensive to hire BDRs, expensive to hire AEs. It's expensive to run like big events. It's expensive to do analyst relations. So I would just say like, hey, kind of understanding that, hey, you can start off with PLG is a big first step, right? And there's a lot of different elements that come into that. So maybe, we can start off with the pricing and packaging. I think that's a good place to start.
Sure. Absolutely.
So I think with pricing and packaging, historically, again, if you just had this outbound motion, you're just selling top down, anyone that's on enterprise sales is going to know these are very long deal cycles. These just take a super long time. You're talking 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years sometimes for these, super large accounts here. And a lot of times, you're going to have opaque pricing. So people don't know what it is. You have to talk with a salesperson. And in my experience there is I'll have a lot of, AI or SaaS enterprise companies will reach out to me, but they'll kind of say like, hey, the salesperson or even the CEO, it's hard because when they go in there, no one knows about them. No one knows like who this company is. They have to start from ground zero. Literally no nurturing has happened. So when you're thinking about PLG, when you start pricing and packaging, you've got some different options here when you start to introduce this and to try to change that cycle so they know about you when you come in. The first is I think some people will dip their toes in and they'll do like a free trial. Right. And usually that free trial will either be time bound, user bound, something to where it's a very small amount. Right. A very common one is like a 7-day free trial where you can go in there. In my experience, while I think that's a good start, right? You're letting people start to experience the product and you're going in there. There are a lot of limitations to that. Right. And the biggest one is you just don't get that much time to really experience value. You're essentially like, we're all busy. We're doing 30 things. Like maybe you're checking out one potential company, but maybe you have 1 or 2 times you can check them out in that 7-day period. Fires are coming up. There's a lot of stuff you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So the 7-day trial is one from a time perspective is kind of limited. The next part, which is hard when you do the 7-day trial, is you're just not experiencing a lot of value with it. Right. So I always have like a thing within product-like growth when you're thinking about pricing and packaging. It's you want to have as much value as you can before the actual first purchase decision. And when you only have like 7 days, you just don't have a lot of value. And the other thing that comes up too within that pricing and packaging and that 7-day trial is a lot of companies will take a packaging element and make this very feature limited. Almost like I call crippleware, right? Like you go in there and there's like barely anything you can do and it's hard to do. And you're like, this sucks, And in a weird way, you're giving them like a negative experience right before they're considering buying you. So the trial had its place. And I think for a lot of people that are embarking in PLG, sometimes that's all they think it is, right? It's just like, PLG is free trial. And I think PLG is much broader than that. But if we're just focusing on pricing and packaging, the free trial is a little bit limited. So where I like to start off with is, hey, start off with a true freemium offering. I know that's scary. And I know, especially if you're selling into the enterprise or if you've only sold into the enterprise, that's a super, super scary process. But what I found is when you go with a true free plan, it opens up a lot of doors. Let me dive into this, right? When you have a true free plan and you're thinking about pricing and packaging, my advice is all the user level features, include them for everyone. But what you can do is the enterprise requirements you make as part of that higher up plan, whatever you're calling it, gold, platinum, enterprise, professional, whatever it is, right? What I mean by enterprise requirements are things like single sign-on, right? Like that's big. If you're an enterprise, you need to have that. You want to have like admin controls. You want the admin to be able to go in and kind of administer this. You want a thing like, you want to have an SLA of 99.99% uptime. Very important if you're an enterprise. You want to have a dedicated customer success manager. Really important if you're an enterprise. You want to have provisioning and deprovisioning of users, right? So when I was at Slack, you didn't want to have a scenario where someone would leave the company and they still have access to Slack. That's bad, right? There's compliance risks. There's a bunch of stuff that you don't want to have happen, right? You want to, when they come on, you want to have them automatically join. When they leave, they automatically get out. Does a user really see any of those stuff? Right? Not really, right? Like, if you're using Slack, you're going in, you're using emoji reactions, you're posting to different channels. The user gets a really good experience, right? But eventually, if you want to roll this out more broadly, you kind of need to upgrade. So you have these natural upgrade drivers. The other benefit of having like a free plan where you have that level is you tend to get a lot of seed and grow. So I was just doing a separate video on this at SaaS CMO Pro, where it's like enterprise sales is in PLG, it's like their best friend, right? And one of the reasons is like you get the seed and grow motion happening. And anyone that's on enterprise sales too, what you'll intuitively understand is like, hey, it's always easier to sell more into an existing customer than to get a net new customer on, right? Because that customer already knows you, you have a relationship, right? Like it's just easier, right? Now, you may want more net new business, but generally in sales, it's easier to sell to existing customers. Well, when you have a freemium model, you tend to get seed and grow. And seed and grow means that you're starting to get all these little pockets of usage at a company, right? They're starting to use you, right? Like Slack, remember IBM was a really big account of ours, and it was a tiny team. I think it was in Southeast Asia that started using us, like a design team, and then bumped to another team and another team and another team. And it just started like spreading within the organization. That wouldn't have happened if we didn't have a freemium plan, if we didn't have like an easy, simple to use product that was, very full featured, like it was rich, you could do a lot of stuff with it, right? In that 7-day trial, maybe that one team starts it and they didn't get enough value out of it. And they're like, oh, whatever, I'm not using this. Or, oh, I have to pay already, like, oh, I'm not, whatever, like moving on to something else. So, from an enterprise sales perspective, that freemium level allows you to get all the seed and grow. It allows you to naturally, have usage within it. And then what we found too, what happens in there is if you layer in an evangelism playbook, is this idea of like, hey, of all the people using your product, you're using analytics, product level data to understand and identify who are your biggest evangelists. So again, if we go to the example, there's a design team in Southeast Asia using us. Maybe now it's spread to there's 200 people, at IBM using it. Well, you can go through and you can go, well, who uses Slack the most there, right? Who scored us the highest on the Net Promoter Score or the CSAT survey? Who's our super fans, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, the super fan, if you're an enterprise salesperson and you're like, okay, do I just go straight and cold and talk to procurement or try to talk to like whoever? Or you find the super fan, like, hey, super fan, introducing it to some other departments that you think might make sense here. Or maybe we loop in procurement. We have some additional, security or compliance type features that I think they'd be interested in. Hey, super fan, would you mind making a testimonial for us, right? Or I remember one time I was on a call at Slack and we were talking to a very large company we're talking to the procurement person, and we brought in a super fan on the call.
That's incredible.
And the procurement person's like, I don't know, it's expensive, if we should use this. And the super fan's like, no, but we got to use this, Bob. Like, it's amazing. Like, I cannot not use this, right?
And that's, sorry to cut you off, but that's what's so interesting, where it's just like all of a sudden, it's kind of like that referral motion, right? That word of mouth, where
Totally.
you're not breaking into this cold environment. You have fans, you have evangelists, you have users, even if they're not like super fans or evangelists, right? They know the product, they know the value, they can speak to it. The rest of their team is using it. Like, going back to what you were saying at the very start of this around like, enterprise and PLG sometimes feel like people think that they don't necessarily go together. It's peanut butter and jelly in a way, where it's just like you just have this easier way in. Like I could speak to it as well from like HubSpot days where, Canva was something that a bunch of different teams were using. And it was something that I was trying to build a system around as well. And it became so much easier to say, well, this team's using it and that team's using it and this other team is using it. Let's just consolidate and let's get this enterprise license and let's do this the right way, right? Like security was going to listen to me. IT was going to listen to me. Leadership was going to listen to me. And I can tell you that like our AE at the time basically just had to like send a contract at that point. Like, it took no effort at all.
Totally, right? And I think sometimes there's a misperception that if you have PLG, it means that you're not doing enterprise, or you're not even having salespeople. I remember a lot of people would come up to us when I was a Slack and like, oh, you don't have salespeople. I'm like, no, we have salespeople. I managed them, right? Like I was more CRO, so I was running sales, success, support, and marketing. But what I think it does is it makes their life easier, right? And also like all these add-on effects. If you're like a SaaS metrics person, you have a much shorter deal cycle. You have a higher ASP. They attrit less. Your NRR is better. You have a better NPS, which means you're growing faster. Like all these like side-on effects matter and just make their lives easier. And I get it, right? Like, hey, if you're a salesperson and you haven't done this before, and it's not as common, right, for enterprise companies to embrace this, it sounds scary. It's like, wait, what? We're going to do high velocity, or what happens? Are they going to take my credit, or people are just going to buy online? And what I found is, at the enterprise level, it's really, really hard to do a pure high velocity self-service motion, right? For like a large deal. There's just you're dealing with too many stakeholders. You're dealing with procurement and IT and InfoSec and line of business and C-suite and legal, right?
Yeah.
Like that just doesn't work in a, like, I'm going to buy one click, sign here for $1 million, right? Like self-service. You still need salespeople that are going to help. But that being said, having a PLG motion means that you're going to have a lot of pockets of usage. They're going to be very happy because they've been getting a lot of value, and you can still level those enterprise requirements to get these other people on your side. And that was a big thing too. When we chose enterprise requirements, we kind of said like, hey, we want carrots for all these other teams that have to sign off, right? Like InfoSec wants single sign-on, IT wants provisioning and deprovisioning, legal. We built a thing, compliance exports, right? So if you get sued, you can harvest all the chats and, make sure you have that there. Procurement wanted, bigger discounts for an enterprise-wide deal. No problem, right? So I think there's smart ways you can leverage it. And that's just a little bit more of a different style than historically. I think a lot of companies just go, okay, like our starter plan has 3 features, our medium plan has 10 features, our enterprise plan has all the features. It's like a different way of doing it than user level features. It's really thinking about more enterprise requirements.
I think that's a really cool approach where, you're going to be dealing with these buyer committees, right? And there's going to be all these stakeholders. So like get ahead of the objections, right? Figure out what each of these groups wants, what each of these stakeholders cares about, and just like lead with that, right? Like here's your SSO, here's your admin, here's this, here's that. I really love that approach because you're not waiting for the objection. You're just handling it ahead of time. And I mean, is that, when we think about it from a process standpoint, right? Like we're talking pricing and packaging, like, is that part of the thought process that goes into the packaging for you?
Yeah, I definitely. I mean, I think in a lot of ways you're dealing with objection level handling. That's another item of this that we did is like, hey, on our enterprise page, or at least when I was there, like we would list out like, hey, here's the top objections, right? We'd almost write like a FAQ. Like, hey, we talked to every one of our salespeople and go, hey, what are the biggest objections you're getting? Okay, well, let's address that ahead of time. Let's address it on the pricing page. Let's find ways that we can message users in the product about these fears, right? Same thing, like we're talking about myths of PLG. Well, there were myths of using Slack or myths of, whatever your product is, right? You can address that ahead of time. And I think that's a big part of product-led growth too. And for me, like, even if we level set here, like product-led growth for me is this idea that people are spending more and more time in their product. And as such, you need to infuse your marketing into the product, your sales into the product, your support into the product, your success into the product. They're not doing these asynchronous, spending all the time on the website or spending all the time, talking to sales or sending an email to get support, like all that stuff you want to infuse into the product. And it's just a very different playbook and mentality when you think of it that way.
I think that's super cool. And that feels like the next step now where you've accepted that PLG can work, right? You've figured out what the prices look like. You've figured out what the package looks like. And now you need to actually build the thing, right? You have to put something together for people to sign up for, right? And this idea of infuse your marketing, sales, and support into the product because they're already there, that's super thoughtful. How do you go about doing that?
Yeah. So from a process perspective, I think the first step is, let's talk about the sales side, right? So generally when you do a PLG motion, you want to infuse some type of high velocity motion into it as well. And high velocity just means someone can go buy this product on their own self-service. Now, what usually will happen there is that will mostly be used by SMBs, some mid-market, right? I think perceptions are changing over time of what you can do online and what people want to do online. And you're starting to see that move further and further up, where people are just comfortable, okay, I know this, or I have my budget. I'm okay just signing up and, using this product here. So, building out a high velocity motion, that literally means you need to have some type of checkout process where people can go and buy and, everything activates on its own. That's new for some people, right? A lot of times if you're selling enterprise software, it wasn't just easy to get started and buy it online, right? You would get handed off to a customer success manager who would customize the tool for you and do all these things. So it's a little bit different mentality there when you're allowing a self-service buying option. But that's a big part for sales. Another we just had mentioned is, hey, how do we put a lot of these objection handling into the pricing and packaging page, right? How do we make these facts? How do we start to address them? That's a big element of it. I think another one that we had talked about as well was hey, how do you tap into the evangelists, right? So how do you find your super fans, right? That might mean, hey, you start doing Net Promoter Score, but maybe as opposed to Net Promoter Score to, 5% of your customers to get us a score, what we would do is we would do a Net Promoter Score for every single company and down to the individual level, right? Not just the admin who bought it, but literally every single user. You're asking them, hey, what was your experience? Now that could be in product or email, whatever. But the idea is, are you granular enough to be able to find those super fans, right? So that's a big part of the sales side. Marketing, there's a bunch of different elements here. So again, if you kind of believe that the idea of PLG is people are spending more time in the product, well, they're spending less time on the website, right? How do you infuse some of that marketing charm into the product? And a big part there, there's a couple of things. One is hey, can you create that really cool visual identity that you created on the website that's got fun colors and emotion and people and faces? Can you now infuse that into the actual software itself? Because this is notorious. What will happen is you look at a lot of AI tools out there or B2B SaaS tools, you go to the website and it's totally one experience. And then you go into the product and it's white background, black text. It's boring. It's hard to use. There's no faces anymore. There's no color. There's no anything, right? So can you start to make the product have a little bit more of your brand, a little bit more of your visual identity? Another part along with that is creating unique tone and voice, but putting it in the product, right? So Slack, that was a really big, I think, hidden success for us was we spent a lot of time thinking about having unique tone and voice. And that appeared on our content and our website, but it also appeared in the product, right? Yeah. And what we did with that is marketing would work with product on new launches. We would go through the sign-up flow. We would figure out what are the most heavily used features. We'd help with the release notes, but we'd have the marketer, the person that was awesome at writing copy and knew our tone and voice, they would go in and write these. It wasn't the back-end developer that was forced to write prompts and interactions and success dialogues if they hit okay, but you had someone that had a little bit of personality, right? So now your marketing's in the product, your tone and voice, your visual identity. Another thing I've used in the past too was having what I call in-product messaging, IPM. Mm-hmm. And the base idea here is you would have some modules within the product or even could be on the login page that you could use to help educate users. And a big part of marketing is nurturing, right? So anyone that's on marketing, right, you kind of realize, especially if you're an enterprise, these are long deals, right? And there's a lot of education that has to happen, top of funnel, mid funnel, bottom funnel type content. Well, why would you only put that content on the website, especially if you're kind of recognizing this world where people are spending less time on the website and more time in the product, right? So, hey, carve out a little space. So, like I remember at Zendesk, we wrote this one piece of content, super popular. It was the top 10 interview questions for hiring customer support agents. Great piece of content. Like the people that are running support teams really like that because it was very practical. It helped like with a pain point they had. Well, why not, like, as opposed to just putting it on our blog and 3% of our, users see it, put it in the product, right? Have a way for them to access that content where they get educated, and not just that type of content, but maybe it was best practices on using Zendesk. Maybe it was, hey, here's a really cool example of what a customer is doing and how they're getting the most out of it, right? Or you could get in the pricing and packaging stuff. Like I remember we did kind of an advanced enterprise offering that had some advanced analytics. Well, as opposed to exposing it to everybody, like maybe we just said, hey, people who have run at least 10 custom reports are going to get exposed to this new plan, and we'll give them a special offer. And I think that's another side benefit. Again, this kind of this thesis here, like why this is good for enterprise PLG is you're nurturing folks now. Yeah. People that have started using it, small team, whatever, all of a sudden are getting educated. Like, oh, I didn't know you could do this in Zendesk. You can do all this stuff. Wow, that's pretty cool. We know what this customer did, or oh, this is kind of cool. They're helping me out with some pain points. I like this company more, right? And so when sales finally does enter the conversation, you have nurtured, educated users that also tend to love you because now they're having a good experience too. They're like, oh, that was a fun dialogue, right? Like, oh, I read the Slack release notes, on my mobile phone update. That was actually kind of funny, right? They're laughing and smiling. They're having a good experience there.
Well, that change log was amazing. Like that change log, like just to go along with everything you're saying, it was always full of personality. It was always fun. Like I'm an engineer by trade. I don't know if you actually knew that, but I've seen change logs that are just painful. It's just the worst. And like you would look at those Slack change logs and it was just enjoyable. It was like comedic. It was fun. It was something like, I'm not going to say you looked forward to it. I don't know how many people look forward to reading change logs, right? But like it had personality that no one else had. And I think like that just goes along with a lot of what you're saying, where like you have these opportunities to provide a different kind of experience, these different user types. And why wouldn't you, right? Like as you were sharing the anecdote, like I'm going to age myself because like video games don't load anymore. But I think about like, the console era of like the 2000s, 2010s, where like in between like sequences, be like, oh, if you press the select button, this will happen. If you do this, that'll happen.
Yes.
And it's just like, oh, you know what? That's really helpful. Now I know how to do a triple jump with Mario. I don't know, whatever the example is, but like I literally hear Mario Kart playing in the background here. But like you have these opportunities to get in front of people, and you could just say like, let's do the same thing everyone else does and let's keep it business as usual. Or let's take advantage of that. And I think when you take advantage of that, that's the big differentiator, right? That's when you start creating that love. That's when you start providing that education. That's when you start really nurturing in the way that you're describing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's such a good point. And yeah, and I think too, it's like a lot of times this doesn't happen. AI or SaaS tools that just are very not friendly. They're not fun to use. They're hard to use. There's no delight in it. And I think a lot of that comes because product and marketing were set up as two totally different teams with two totally different leaders with totally different metrics, and they don't work together, right? And so you have this bifurcation of the website is marketing and the product is product, right? And they're never going to work together. So as much as I love PLG and I'm a huge, huge fan, it kind of changes how you think about things, right? These traditional boundaries start to go away, right? Like marketing needs to work with product folks, right? You need to go in there and start creating moments of delight. Marketing's good at that. Marketing's good at they're good at making stuff fun. They're good at making delightful moments. They're good at reducing friction because they do a ton of conversion rate optimization. They're good at reducing steps. But historically, those skill sets were limited to landing pages and the website and, videos and other places. But this idea that you're moving them to the product is super powerful. I remember another fun example I give is for anyone that works for a tech company or maybe, work for a company and you get your options via Carta, when Carta does their equity grant and you have to accept it. But when you do accept, they do a little confetti. And it's a small thing, but it's kind of like a big deal, right? Especially if you're new and you're getting your first option grant, it's like a nice, delightful moment. And I'm a big believer in marketing that those delightful moments rub off on your brand. And again, to kind of get back to the whole reason we're doing this, even if you're enterprise, right? Well, again, now when you're starting to deal with people, they're using the product more, they're having more fun with it. they're having all these delightful experiences that when you finally reach out, they're like, oh, I love you guys. You're fantastic, right? Like, this is great. We want to use you, right? Compare that to, you've had no interaction with this company. You've called in, and you're trying to get them to sign a big deal, right? And that's why these things take years, and also like all the heavy lifting, the nurturing is on sales now.
Yeah.
And again, can they do it? Yes. Is that very time heavy? Right? Yes, right? There's no kind of scale with it. And so I do think like that tactical implementation of marketing into the product. And then just to wrap that up, like, right, you have success in the product, right? Okay, well, what historically would happen is, you'd have to sign up a separate session with success. Maybe you get a success person, maybe you wouldn't. I've brought up a lot of products that I had 10 people selling me, and then the minute I signed a line, like everyone ran away.
Yeah.
And I was assigned, 1/1000th of your customer success manager, right? Well, you get to talk to for 10 seconds every quarter, or when you're renewing, and then they would, like reach out to you. But you could be smart here, right? You could go, okay, let's be proactively customer success. So let's say in the same example, IBM, big company, or Adobe, or whoever, Google, they're starting to use your product, and maybe they're using it for the first time. Well, that could be a huge account. What if you proactively did proactive live chat in the product and said like, hey, Bill, I noticed you're using this tool for the first time. Like, how's it going? Sometimes people get stuck here. This is actually how you need to set it up, right? What a great experience, right? Doesn't mean you have to do it everywhere, but you might go, hey, we have a top 50 account list that these are our dream accounts. Well, if someone drops in from one of those accounts, is in the product, that's a great time to give some proactive support with. So, and you do the same thing with chat. Again, you don't have to do it everywhere, but you could, for your support requests, as opposed to reactive, like they have to go to the website, they have to fill out a ticket, they have to wait for someone to email. Well, infuse that all into the product. So it's just really easy to get that help when you need it. So there's a lot of elements of it, but I think if you just think holistically, like, hey, these big themes of how do we get these teams that normally are very asynchronous and not even involved in the product at all, how do we get them into the product? How do we give these people better experiences, more delightful experiences? How do we reduce friction? You kind of give those goals to these teams, and they're going to start making these improvements, right? And that's why, again, it's like PLG is so much more than just a 7-day free trial, right? It's really completely rethinking how these teams work together and the experiences that they deliver.
There's something to that, and you were touching on it at the start of this when you were talking about like, do you go freemium or do you go with the trial? But like, also because there's so many potential users, because there's so many stakeholders, because these companies are so big, like, what does implementation even look like, right? Like, how much time are you spending just like getting started in that first 7 days before you could even do anything? So like, the notion of going that route with this type of potential account size is just like, it just doesn't make any sense. It's literally the antithesis of why you would do this, it feels like.
Totally.
Well, so, okay, we've now implemented sales or infused sales, marketing, and success, right, into the product. So you know what you're going to charge, which is $0, right? You know that you're going to give it to people in perpetuity, which is excellent. You've added those touches and those like extra bits of care. What happens next?
So the next element that I wanted to touch on that I think is really important is awareness, right? So again, if we're kind of level setting, this is enterprise. Mm-hmm. We want enterprise to do well, right? We want to be able to sell more into the enterprise. Like, why would you use PLG? So we've talked about some of those reasons. Another big reason is to address the number one complaint I get when I work with companies and I advise them when they reach out to me is they go, Bill, like, we've got this really cool AI product. We've got this really cool B2B SaaS product. We sell into the enterprise and no one knows about us. Mm-hmm. No one knows about us. It's always we're starting from ground zero, right? There's just a lack of awareness there. What I have found is when you embrace PLG and you embrace a freemium plan, what ends up happening is you get a lot of free users. Now, some people will look at that in different ways, right? Like maybe the CFO is like, oh my God, like those aren't free users. We have to pay for their support costs and the bandwidth costs and the product development costs. Like, we should limit it, right? And that's why sometimes you get into these like crippleware or free trial things. But what I've found as a marketer is that when you start getting 1,000 free users, 10,000, 100,000, 1 million, 10 million, is that essentially is your subsidized marketing engine, right? And all of those people are out there talking about your company. And again, because you've kind of done the PLG route and you're infusing marketing, sales, success, people are having good experiences, delightful experiences. They're getting value faster. They love your company. So now you have like these millions of fans, hundreds of thousands of fans, whatever it is, out there constantly talking about your product. And what happens? Your awareness goes up. I would track this at all the companies I was with. We would track aided recall, unaided recall, sentiment, share voice, share conversation, whole bunch of good brand metrics out there, right, that you can choose from. But what you saw is I would consistently see the companies I worked for or advised for that had free plans, their awareness was much, much higher. Now, again, when you tie this back into enterprise sales, again, now when you do start dealing with this company, you have usage and they know you, but also a lot of people that aren't even using your product yet still know about you because, again, so many people are talking about you. So many people are talking about Slack and, oh yeah, I heard Slack or this or that, right? So you have this like subsidized marketing engine and it tremendously helps out with those deals. Now you might go, hey, Bill, like, can't you do other marketing stuff? Can't you go buy paid ads and run events and do all that stuff? And you can, and you probably should. But here's the thing, those all have much higher costs associated with them. So if you tally up the cost of bandwidth support, product usage for the free user, and then you compare that to, hey, I want to run an ABM campaign or an event, or I want to do a big billboard campaign, that's going to be a lot higher, right? And so you have this, like, again, the CFO, a very capital efficient way of growing your brand, getting out there, creating awareness. And that's super powerful. The other thing that comes from it, which again, you have to be concerned about if you're an enterprise, selling to the enterprise, is it creates a natural moat, a barrier for new competitors to be able to come into the market, right? When no one has a lot of awareness in a space, it's just a void. It allows other competitors to come in. And again, a lot of times too, if you've only skipped to the enterprise and you only sell the enterprise, a lot of times companies will start and they'll go via the SMB route, right? They'll start in, maybe they have a free plan, they start getting awareness, momentum, and then they move up market.
You gotta go to enterprise.
Mid-market. Yeah. And then all of a sudden now they're an enterprise. And now you have like this competitor that everyone knows about, that is simple, easy to use. You're selling this product. I mean, I feel for it, right? Like you're selling this product that no one knows about. You're going in cold from the top. You're trying to get them to buy a wall-to-wall deal. And, you have no super fans at that company. It's just so hard, right? So I think in a lot of ways, like the freemium, the awareness that comes from it, the natural moats that you build because of that are, again, like, perfectly suited for the enterprise. And again, I know this is different thinking. It's like, that's always been my kind of DNA is I want to have a more modern go-to-market playbook. I think go-to-market is always evolving, right? And just as like, if you're a CTO, you're not going to code your product with a 20-year-old language. You're not going to use like SQL or some crazy, like, why would you take a 20-year-old go-to-market model, right?
Absolutely.
Like, hey, there's so many new advances coming out, right? So I think like from an awareness perspective, the next step of the process, like that's a really big thing. And from a pure process perspective, if you're the one that's like, hey, Bill, I'm listening to this, or Dimitri, this is great, I want to do this. Well, you now have to educate your internal stakeholders, right? Maybe even shifting into the next area, right? Like internal education about PLG is absolutely critical. I did another deep dive video just on the 7 reasons PLG initiatives fail. And I have seen a lot of them fail. And usually it's not because the business metrics didn't work out. It was because there wasn't enough momentum internally created. Like sales tried to stonewall it. Finance wouldn't support it. Marketing wasn't involved at all. It was just given to the product team, quote unquote. And they did a very limited variation of PLG. So when you kind of believe in PLG and for the enterprise, you have to go and start educating all your internal stakeholders, the CEO, the CFO, the board, 5 or 6 people on the board. You have to convince all them. You have to convince the sales, marketing, product. It's a lot of like evangelism, right? And you're kind of teaching a new concept. Yeah, it's and again, so many misconceptions about this that, even freemium, like I feel confident talking to you about this because I've done freemium plans literally every single company I've been with across 30 years. B2C, media, B2B, SaaS, all of them, AI, like, right? So I kind of know, I'm not trying to say like, oh, I know better than else. I'm just trying to say like, hey, I know what's reality and I know what's myth. And I hear a lot of the myth. And that's a big part of like the process of doing a PLG is you have to recognize there's just a ton of myths about this and you have to address them head on and build trust with these different stakeholders that at the end of the day can kind of like crush this initiative, right? Like inertia is like one of the most powerful enemies of a PLG motion. It's just well, we've been doing it this way.
Yeah.
We've priced it this way for the last 10 years and we like it. Like, and no one owns pricing too. So it's like, well, who owns it? How do we change it? And you have to spend a lot of calories there.
For sure. I mean, it's like with anything, right? Like it's easier to just stand still. It's easier to not change, but not changing is what kills you. And again, like looking at your resume, looking at the track record of companies that you've worked with, like there's clearly a reason why this works. There's clearly a reason why this is something that you believe in, because companies like Slack, companies like Zendesk are household names. They're name brands that all, I'm not going to say they're not identical. They're very different companies, obviously, but like you could see those threads that are connected. You could see how you've infused those different elements that you talked about. You could see how the freemium model gets people in. You could see how you also create these evangelists and supporters of these brands, right? Like I don't know anyone that has gone over to Slack, that has started with a free account, that has transitioned to a paid account, and then said, I really want to just give Teams a shot right now. Like it just doesn't happen, right? Like, and I'm sure there are other reasons as well, but like once you're in, because I think there's some companies that will sink their hooks into you. And I truly mean that in a negative way, where it's like you just can't get out, like you're just stuck there. But with something like Slack, you want to be there. Like it is a reflection of a modern day company at this point, right? Like if you're not using Slack, like even like you look at a job rec and like it's like, oh, use Teams. You're like, I don't know. Are you sure about that? Like, I don't know that I want to apply for this. But if it says Slack, you're like, okay, these people are probably legit. So like you've created this other marker through this methodology, which I think is really, really cool and really interesting. And like, obviously, if you don't have the people inside the house believing in it, you're not going to get people outside the house believing in it. And I wonder, I guess, why is the internal education happening at this point and not at the start?
Yeah, definitely at the start, right? So everyone's at a different stage with this stuff, right? Like a lot of times companies will reach out to me and like, hey, we've done a little bit of it. Like maybe we have a free trial, or maybe we've started to make our product simpler, but we haven't done this, or this, right? Or some are just like, B2B SaaS founder, like, hey, I want to do this, right? But like, we need someone that can help catalyze and move it forward. So I do think you need to be evangelizing. And that's not like a PLG thing. That's just like a, 101 for any big change management project you're trying to. I remember when I was at Salesforce, like I was one that kind of brought in marketing automation. This was before Salesforce had their own solution. And that was a big thing. That was different. And I had to spend a lot of time educating, why we should do this. What are the benefits? Again, moving to more nurturing and marketing playing a bigger part in that. But it was hard. It wasn't just let's buy this and install it. It was like I have to convince 30 different stakeholders like why this is really a good thing. I do think that element is a really important part. Maybe if you're ready, like we can go to the next step of the process, which I think is like this idea of moving to a product qualified lead. So a lot of times in sales, and especially if enterprise sales, your normal workflow is marketing runs some events, PR, whatever. You get a lead that comes in, right? They come to the website, they fill out a lead, and that lead gets handed off to a salesperson. And there's a whole best practice there, right? Of like, hey, doing calendar scheduling and getting to them as soon as you can. But that for a long time, 30 years plus, that was like how you did sales to enterprises, right? And again, with PLG now, this idea is like, hey, when they come maybe to the homepage, now it's not just contact sales or fill in a lead. It's, hey, start for free, right? There's a different button on the homepage. And what that means is it's like a different route of how this all works together. So now it's like people come in, they start using the product. And the idea is you move away from like a lead to a marketing qualified lead, sales accepted lead, sales qualified lead, all the way through pipe. But now you're going the product route, right? But you can do the same thing though. You can have this concept of a lead that comes in, and then you have the concept of a product lead and a product qualified lead. And so the idea there is that you kind of set internally, hey, when does it make sense that this person, this company has passed a certain level of product usage that we want to send sales in? Now, I think historically, even in the marketing route, sales gets involved too early, right? And it's like, oh, they have a pulse, right? Yep. It's time for us to go in. You've
answered an email. Let's go.
And, yeah. They scanned a badge at an event. They must be ready to buy, right? And again, I try to look at it more holistically, like almost put my VC hat on. Is like, hey, how do you devise a really capital efficient growth engine? And in that engine, you don't want to be using one-to-one sales or knife fights. Mm-hmm. like for long periods of time. It's just too expensive, right? So again, you want this concept of nurturing people. Most B2B sales will take, I think something like I read, like 250 interactions before it closes, right? So how do you move more of those away from one-to-one knife fights and more of them from they get educated and nurtured in a scalable way? So in that model, they go into the product and now you're watching them. Okay, maybe it was one person now, this team's grown to 5. Now their product usage has gone up X amount. Wow, now they've started using this one feature that's usually a really good indicator that they will become a paid customer. Now let's go in, right? So they pass a threshold and you have that concept of a product qualified lead and now sales goes in. And you kind of have to, again, work and, assign, just like as you would one with sales engage in a traditional marketing lead that comes in. Now you're deciding like, hey, when does it make sense for people to go in? I'll just say this, like in my experience, the more value they have before the first purchase decision, the more higher the conversions are going to be.
For sure.
So I would say like, hey, resist that like 1 week thing. Maybe it's a month, maybe it's 3 months, on average for them to get up enough usage to where it makes sense to go in. Now, if you're a salesperson at first, man, I don't know if I like this, but think about the flip side. How many times have you wasted cycles on leads that are just crap, right? It's the whole reason you get this, marketing, they suck. All they send us is like bad leads, right? Well, wouldn't you rather just go in and every lead you focused on was like a really good, juicy lead that like, hey, like, wow, they're ready and like, they love us and they want to do a wider deal, right? This is great, right? So that's the idea, I think, behind a PQL. And again, it sounds simple in theory. I think for a lot of companies, established companies, it's hard because it's big fundamental changes. On the flip side, if you're starting up an AI company today and you embrace this more efficient model, it's not that hard to build in, right? As you start to like build your sales teams out and you start to build the methodology and the ops side of it. So I think like that idea of moving to a PQL type routing process is really powerful. You can still keep the existing one. You can have 2 buttons in there, contact sales or, watch a demo, but you also now start having this free one and you want to be able to build out that workflow.
For sure. It's interesting because it sounds a lot like habit breaking versus habit building. And it's always so much harder to break a habit. So like those kind of legacy sales motions, it's really hard to break out of them. And I imagine even with the PQL, even like if they've like said, okay, we're going to follow this PQL methodology and we're going to wait for people to get in. It's still just like the urge to say, oh, they signed up. They created a username. Let's go. Like that's still hard to break. So, having those metrics, having those kind of like barometers of like, okay, well, they've performed X amount of actions. They've interacted with Y people within their team, whatever it might be. Like that is a really great way to say, okay, they're using it. They're in, they're believers. And that like changes it from a quantity game to a quality game. Like just going back to what you were saying, like that's what you want to be doing. You want to be playing the quality game because you know that those people are more than likely to actually cut a check, give you their credit card number, whatever it might be, because they're already believers. They're already in it. And when it's like, okay, watch a demo and then you get your 14 emails and every 2 seconds someone's reaching out to you on LinkedIn like, oh, hey, do you have a second to chat about this or that? Like that's brutal as the customer. Like who wants that? But, and I know you and I have like talked about this a little bit, like in other places, right? Like if someone's in it, like they're in it, right? Like support them, nurture them, help them along their way. And they will happily hand you all of that like payment information. They will beg you to take, it's that meme, right? Like shut up and take my money. That's all it is.
Totally. Yeah. So maybe, and I know we're kind of coming to the end here, the last step of the process for me is the metric side of it. Mm-hmm. So we had just mentioned product qualified leads, PQLs, but there are a whole host of really good PLG type metrics. For those that really want to dive into it, I've done a total like 15-minute video just on that, but like at a high level, some good ones are PQLs, a net promoter score is a really good one. Daily active users, this idea of just how many people are coming in and using your product every day is a big one. TTV, time to value. So that's the base idea of like you literally measure out how many clicks does it take before someone gets their first aha moment. Mm-hmm. If that's 132 clicks, try to get that to 30 clicks or 15 clicks, right? Or whatever it is. And you can measure it by time, whatever your product analytics allow you to do there. But I think the base idea is like, start measuring some of these PLG type metrics, right? And then secondarily, again, because philosophically, if you do agree with that marketing, sales, success, support needs to be infusing their stuff into the product, well, you have 5 cross-functional teams that should be assigned these products assign these metrics at a high level. So that was a big thing I thought worked really well for us at Slack is we had like these 3 really core metrics. We had ARR, but we had Net Promoter Score and DAUs. And all the cross-functional teams shared in that. And what that meant was like, when we were marketing, we're like, how do we get more DAUs? How do we make the product stickier, right? How do we give them more delightful experiences? So we spent more time on the product, right? Mm-hmm. And sales wanted to increase ARR. They spent more time on the product. And support wanted to improve the overall Net Promoter Score of the company, right? So they were not just focused on how quickly can I answer this ticket just using a macro, but hey, can I actually give a really good quality interaction experience? Or hey, could I want to start helping people out on Reddit and these other places because it's a better interaction? Or hey, I want to give them in-product support, right? Because it's a better interaction. I think like the metrics are really important and making sure you've kind of identified those. And again, my preference would be assign them more as shared metrics, like company type metrics. Don't just say, hey, we've chosen Joe on the product team and they're leading up a little tiger team to do PLG and only Joe and that small team has those PLG metrics. Like this should be like, no, this is a company-wide initiative and all the teams in the company are going to share in these metrics and we're going to do everything we can to incentivize those teams to improve them.
Yeah, I love that side effect of breaking down silos. Like, it's just so powerful. We are coming up on time, and this has been incredible. This is like, I really hope people enjoy this because I know I am. So what's next, right? Like, what in the PLG sphere for you? Like, what are you doing next? Where are you applying this process next?
I think for me, there's like, it's funny, like we've talked 50 minutes on this. Like I've done 27 videos just on PLG. It's insane, right? If you geek out on this stuff, go to SaaSCMOPro.com. You can, really dive into any one particular one. But I think just in general, I like talking about it because that's one of the reasons I did the SaaS CMO Pros. I just want to democratize this information. Mm-hmm. I feel like it's such a good capital efficient way to grow. And I really I feel like I talk to a lot of AI founders or SaaS founders that have like a really amazing products and they're just not growing fast. And it's really expensive. And I get it. It's harder to get, if you're in SaaS, it's hard to get funding now. They're looking at all these core efficiency metrics like CAC payback and magic number and just how efficient your growth. And I feel for like these awesome people that made amazing products, but just for whatever reason had used a really older go-to-market model. So I think PLG is really powerful. It has so many good add-ons and it works great for the enterprise. I was saying it works great for the enterprise. I know there's like this myth, this perception, we can't do it. Oh, that's just for SMB or this, but I've seen it. I've seen it all the companies I've worked with. I've seen it for a lot of companies I advise. I don't know. For me, it's like, it's super fun for me to talk about this stuff and I just want to help others out with it.
On that note, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Everyone, check out Bill, reach out. AI founders, give him a call because he will make your business grow big time. Catch you on the next one.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Dimitri. This was a great conversation. I loved it.
Thank you, Bill.